How do you create a genuine connection with someone while having a conversation? I've often felt when I'm having a conversation, it falls into the boring question-answer interview mode. But I was watching this interview between Farhan Akhtar and Faye D'Souza, and unlike other podcasts where celebrities come across as all polished, I felt this one to be so genuine. And I couldn't help but ask myself, why can I listen to this interview on repeat? So after watching and rewatching this particular podcast multiple times, the pieces started falling together. In fact, I noticed how this interview was not a combination of question-answer alone, but an entire boiler of different stories and narratives that not only helped draw a connection between the two people involved, but to the rest of the audience as well. So in this video, let's understand the 3 stories that Farhan Akhtar uses to help this conversation flow seamlessly, how you can adapt the same principles in your daily conversations, and some common mistakes to avoid that prevent us from creating connections. By the way, if you're new here, my name is Radeep from Frantically Speaking. We release communications content like this all the time. If you're into that, consider hitting subscribe. And if you want to take your communications journey to the next level, you can book a free consultation call with us by clicking on the Calendly link given in the description below. We can talk and see if we can work together. Let's get into the first story. There's a part in the interview where Farhan Akhtar is talking about a movie that he had directed called Laksh, one of my favorite movies of all time. And while that movie now has found a cult following, at the time of its release, it was not that commercially successful. And here's him talking about how he thought that working hard would result in him getting the results.
What kind of business it should do. And it didn't do that. And that really saddened me at the time. And it took me a while to kind of get out of it. Because it was the first time I was experiencing it at that kind of level and publicly at that level.
Yeah.
We had worked so hard to make that film. And somewhere in the back of your head is this belief that, yaar, if you work hard, the rewards are going to be great.
And this story is where the first principle came in, which is the principle of universal relatability. A story is fascinating when it is completely fresh and completely absurd and it just has a lot of uncanny elements to it. But a story is also interesting if it just causes a relatability factor between you and your listener. Farhan Akhtar talking about how he worked hard at something and expected it to bear fruits, but it didn't, is a universal concept. It's something that a lot of us have gone through. By putting our heart and soul into something and not having it give us the returns can feel really demotivating. And hearing a story that propagates that idea is a great way to cause a connection. It not only helps us to come across as more vulnerable, but it causes a relatability factor because there's a good chance that the person you're talking to has been through something like this or knows someone who's been through something of a similar nature. In fact, he even does this when he talks about his sister Zoya Akhtar and how she was always so sorted and it always seemed like she had a plan while he was just figuring his way without much of a plan.
There was a certain degree of embarrassment, because I wasn't good at anything, So like Zoya was always very clear, like about what she wanted to do. She studied well. She did her graduation. Then she decided she wants to do film school, so she went to film school. She got a job with Meera Nair. Then she came back and started working as a production assistant and as an assistant director. So she was always doing something. So everyone felt like she has a plan.
Both these stories cause universal relatability, which essentially means there's a high chance that the other person has felt what you have felt in a manner of speaking. The next time you're having a conversation, try to think of stories that can cause relatability to almost anybody. Topics like these of hard work and failure and siblings are great examples of that itself. But one of the most interesting things I saw in this interview was a thing that I only noticed at my second viewing. Let me just play you the clip and tell me if you can observe it.
When you have that kind of success, the Dil Chahta Hai success, which informed sort of the pop culture for an entire generation. And I had a sound of Shankar Ehsaan Loy in the show. We were talking about the music of that.
The music was amazing.
I mean, still current, still sort of, so valid whenever you watch it. When you have that success and you sit down at your computer again saying, I have to write, how do you, what goes on that paper because you're already...
but I'm sorry, I'll just share one story since you mentioned Ehsaan and the music.
Now, if you noticed it, what Farhan Akhtar did is while Faye D'Souza was about to ask him a question, he interrupted her, called back to something she had mentioned earlier and said a story along those lines itself. And I want to talk about the concept of interruption used in a positive fashion. Most of the time we're told when someone's talking, we shouldn't interrupt them, but sometimes interruptions can work in our favor. The thing is, when two people are conversing, the reason why conversations tend to fall flat is because the two people think that they are here to just kill the time. Think about the last time you ran into someone on the road or at a grocery store. You're just trying to talk to pass the time and be courteous and then move on. Hence, it's very hard to create a connection in that setting. But when we're talking to someone and we show that, hey, no, I'm here to talk and I want to make this particular conversation interesting, interruption can be a great tool to communicate that. It shows that the other person is not here just to kill the time, but they're actually here to share things with us and are excited to do so, and hence are interrupting us and calling back to things that we mentioned earlier in the conversation. So I think we shouldn't be that afraid to interrupt people when we're talking to them, especially if we're adding value to the conversation and relating it to something that they had said earlier. Of course, we don't need to do this all the time, maybe once or twice in the entire conversation, because interrupting too much can come across as annoying. And finally, the third story is related to negativity. I've noticed that when I'm talking to somebody and they start talking negatively about somebody, that can be a major downer. And I don't know about you, but I've been on both sides of this, where I have started speaking negatively about somebody and can feel that the conversation is not going really well, and I've been on the listening side of it as well. But that also doesn't mean we need to people please and just talk nicely about everything. In fact, talking about negative things can add more conflict and more interest in a conversation. So the question is, how do we talk about something negatively that we don't agree with? In the podcast, Farhan Akhtar is asked about this movie Animal, starring Ranbir Kapoor, and the controversy it created. And just watch how he talks about his feelings towards that movie.
You know, honestly, the film didn't work for me. The film didn't work. I thought Ranbir's performance was really good.
Yes.
I thought the background score was used amazingly well. And the other thing that I have to admit is I feel that Sandeep made the film that he set out to make. You know, which in itself is commendable if you think about it. Because I'm sure that along the way he must have met many people who asked him, "What are you doing? You know, or how can you do this?" And he said, "Nahi, mujhe ye banani hai." So that commitment, I guess, of a director is something, as much as someone may not like the film, you know, but that you have to admire. I do feel that the character is problematic. I do feel that. But again, I'm not in a place, and I feel that we cannot tell as filmmakers, as writers, as creators, it's not right to tell somebody else that you should make something or shouldn't make something. You know, I think everyone has their own journey.
Yes.
And eventually it's going to be, the audience is going to decide what they want to see and what they don't want to see.
If you notice, it doesn't feel like he's really bashing on somebody. He's not bashing on his colleague. He's not bashing on the creativity. He's just giving a factual opinion that he felt. He's also talking about it from the larger context as to why he feels things happened in a certain way. It doesn't make him come across as bitchy. It just makes him come across as genuine. And when we are saying these stories, there are a couple of mistakes we should avoid. The first is to not use vulnerable stories early on in a conversation, because that can come across as too much for some people. And the second aspect is to pick the right setting to tell stories. If we run into someone outside and we clearly know it's just going to be a brief conversation, we don't need to really get into storytelling over there. In fact, let's say you're out at a dinner party or something, instead of just narrating a story at any point in time, pick a setting where you know there's going to be a moment of uninterruptedness. No one's going to come with the bill, the food is not going to be constantly served, and there's not going to be too much commotion around. That's the right moment to tell a story, so you can actually create that space to cause the connection. But earlier in the video, we spoke about how to talk negatively about something without seeming negative. That can sometimes go the wrong way as well. So it's important to understand, how do we articulate a disagreement with somebody? It not only helps to make the conversation more interesting, but also helps us structure our thoughts effectively when we are not agreeing with what the other person is saying. In fact, you can check out an entire video we've created right here on how Lex Friedman, one of the biggest podcasters in the world, disagrees while being respectful. I'll see you in a second.